Starting off with the weekly review for today, March 29th, 2026. Broad market indices. SPX, S&P 500. Looking first at the SPX, on a monthly time frame, the 5-month simple moving average, SMA, is down at 5,500. It would not be surprising if we ultimately targeted that level by the end of April. Switching over to the weekly chart, we have printed 5 straight down weeks. However, a short-term bounce back to 6,500 would not be unexpected. Looking at the daily chart, we are quite extended from the 5-day SMA, which currently sits at 6,515. Coming back up to target that level would be a likely upside move. Oftentimes, when you get a breakdown like this, a higher retest before consolidating and continuing the downward trend is quite common. Switching over to the market profile, we have clearly broken down lower. The upside point of control, POC, is at approximately 6,535. Tagging this within the short-term balance area would not be surprising. If we continue to consolidate and go sideways without any confirmatory move upwards, a continuation of the lower trend is expected. Downside targets. If we do continue to break lower, the targets on the market profile are significant. 6,400, which has already been met, an untested POC at 6,035, a gap down at approximately 6,030, and then 5,988 below that. Continuing lower, we have 5,800, another gap below at 5,725, untested POCs at 5,650 and 5,500, another gap at 5,300, and ultimately 5,125. A significant move lower through the rest of the year would not be surprising. Q, Nasdaq 100. Similarly, the QQQ is overextended from the 5-month SMA, which is down at 476. This would be the next macro target. Looking at the weekly, a retest back to the 5-week SMA at 590 and the 5-day SMA at 580 would not be surprising. Switching to the market profile, we have clearly broken below the large balance area and waterfall dropped lower. A snapback rally to 577 to 581 to come back and tag the value area low, VAL, or the POC, is entirely possible. VIX, Volatility Index. We are near recent highs. It would not be surprising to see a short-term pullback before ultimately seeing a significant move higher in mid to late April. Targets are 35, 41, 49, and potentially as high as 55, corresponding with an associated move lower in equities. Commodities. Crude oil. Balancing here around the $100 mark. Breaking and holding above 101 will ultimately lead to a move higher. Gold. Short-term oversold and currently balancing this move lower. Silver. Similarly balancing lower. However, there has been no convincing move back upwards into the large value area under 71. If it can break above and build value, higher targets could be possible. At the moment, however, the trend appears down. There are multiple gaps and untested POCs below, and seeing it reach into the mid to low 50s over the next couple of months would not be surprising. Cryptocurrency. Bitcoin. Not showing any movement whatsoever, trading tightly in a large range. It is not exactly exciting at the moment, which can really be said for all of crypto right now. A downside target of 64,000 to 63,000 is the key area to monitor for a potential GDK. Ethereum, showing a very similar chart to Bitcoin, balancing within a very large range. Solana, also balancing similarly, but showing a bit more relative strength. It is balancing closer to its recent range highs and appears to be technically stronger. Equities. Meta, META. Meta has had a significant move lower, but there is potentially further to go. We are looking at downside targets in the mid-400s and 80s. Looking at the market profile, we have clearly broken below the balance area. If the broader market moves lower, seeing Meta fall to 470 would not be surprising. Ultimately, there are downside gaps at 500 and a primary downside target of 480. Micron, MU. Micron has made a significant move lower, breaking below its recent balance area following stellar earnings, and has just continued to sell off. Recent news suggests a potentially lessened need for memory. Thus, there are significant downside targets in play during ultimate market weakness. Trade setup. A short-term rally this week targeting 378 to 390 would not be surprising. We are clearly in a head and shoulders pattern, so a short-term bounce targeting those levels could offer potential entries for further shorts. Monitor for a break of 353, at which point we could start rolling over in mid to late April. Downside targets, 340. A large gap down at 240, and ultimately testing the POC at 225. SanDisk, Western Digital/WDC. Within the memory and storage sector, SanDisk has shown overall relative strength, bouncing here. The pullback has been significantly shallower. Looking at its market profile, we are still largely in a balance area and have not convincingly broken lower. Thus, on any broader market rally, this would likely be a leader. However, with continued market weakness, it would eventually succumb and potentially target as low as 425. GE Vernova, GEV. Another leader in the market has been GE Vernova, which has remained incredibly strong throughout this recent market pullback. The pullback has been extremely shallow. If there is any semblance of short-term market strength, this equity is where you could see a significant rally. Trade setup. We are currently bounded by a tight range. Monitor 912 to the upside and 790 to the downside. A break bag above or below these tradable ranges should be monitored for a definitive trend change. That is all we have for this week. Thank you all for watching, and good luck trading.